We will spend our lives fighting to secure this Imperium, and then I fear we will spend the rest of our days fighting to keep it intact. There is such involving darkness amongst the stars. Even when the Imperium is complete, there will be no peace. We will be obliged to fight on to preserve what we have fought to establish. Peace is a vain wish. Our crusade may one day adopt another name, but it will never truly end. In the far future, there will be only war.
Hail, curious adjutants. My designation is Asmogan, a humble orator of lore and hobby for those with the willingness to listen. Today I shall continue upon my mission to proliferate the known lore of Warhammer 40,000 by presenting an iconic and unforgettable force within the setting's most notable faction of the Imperium. The light in the darkness, the sword which cuts down evil, the bane of all heretics. Indeed, the eternally crusading knights of the Black Templars chapter of the Codex Astartes, also known as the Space Marines. These mighty warriors have been a staple and iconic visual for the hobby for several decades and are my personal favorite faction. Therefore, it is my esteemed pleasure to iterate to you all their histories. Now allow us to turn back the galactic clocks to before the Lion's Awakening, the Tyrannic Wars, and the Age of Apostasy, to the sundering of the Legiones Astartes.
Let the aspirant's first lesson be obedience, for foolishness is bound to his heart. But the chapter's discipline and the will of the chaplain shall drive it from him.
The great angel lay dead, slain by his brother. The crippled golden god, entombed to enact his eternal duty for humanity. The surviving sons, heartbroken and angry, channeled their rage into the scouring. The act of hunting and exterminating the traitorous scum who brought it all about. This is what followed the end of the Horus heresy for the Primarchs, but alas, it was only the beginning of their woes. Rogel Dorn, the stalwart and stern master of defense, was the Primarch of the Imperial Fist Legion of Astartes. He faced much in a strife alone due to the great loss of his favored brother Sanguinius and his closest brother Horus. However, Dorn had been named Praetorian of Terra by the Emperor himself, before the Siege of Terra had even begun. Thus, he was next in line to the throne of Terra, and could not show weakness nor doubt despite all he had lost. Sadly, however, Dorn came to find his surviving brother Guilliman, who had failed to aid in the Battle of Terra as well as the Sundering, had already taken up the throne, assuming supreme authority over the Imperium despite any legitimate claim. Dorn returned to Terra from the Scouring and confronted his perfidious brother about this outrage. The following is not the canonical interaction between the two, for we do not know the exact exchange that went on, though this is my best interpretation.
Guilliman, what are these summons I've received from you, and what's this I've heard of you establishing yourself as Lord Commander of the Imperium?
Dorn, I would remind you to address one's superiors with afforded courtesies. However, I will look past such conduct under the circumstances of all that has happened, as well as your own stated ignorance to the situation. As I stated in my missive, I have written and established a new doctrine under which the Astartes shall operate. This doctrine I have entitled the Codex Astartes. I have called you to discuss the specifics of how you would divvy up your legion.
Divvy up my legion? You mean to sunder my forces? On what grounds and under what authority?
The grounds of preserving the Imperium of Man. As for whose authority, that would be my own as the Lord Commander of the Imperium.
No such position exists.
It does now. I have spoken with the High Lords of Terra, and they have agreed to the anointing of said position and my appointment to it. Now I have no doubt you are rather upset with this turn of events, given our father named you Praetorian of Terra.
Oh, spare me, Guilliman. Save the politicking and honeyed lip service for your High Lord marionettes. If you cared even an ounce for me in my position, you would have discussed these actions and decrees with me and the rest of our brothers long before performing them. I know you do not trust me and find me unfit to rule. Very well, take the damned throne. It's yours to sit out even further battles at your leisure. However, you will not sunder my legion. To divide our forces chaotically and fraction our strength is a foolish decision at best, and a treasonous one at worst.
I would be careful with my words, Dorn.
Or what? You'll kill me? War with me and mine? plunge the Imperium into yet another bloody civil war over your thrice-damned Codex Astartes.
I will do what is necessary to ensure the security of the Imperium.
Secure it from what, Guilliman? The enemy is leaderless and routed. We merely have to hunt the rest down and resecure our borders and holdings. And whilst I am attempting to achieve that very end, you deign to impede such by fracturing what unity we still have left. To those who have proven their loyalties 1,000-fold, no less.
Had Horus not proven his 1,000-fold? Had not Perturabo, Lorgar, Alfarius?
Never against their own. Never against brothers and comrades of countless battles past. As my men have. Damn it, as my sons have. We faced the mulings of the traitors head-on throughout the war, and never broke nor fell to their corruption. We passed our test, and you would throw that aside and spit on it out of cowardice and paranoia.
I respect the sentiment of your words, but you will pay heed to how you address your Lord Commander. We are not equals, Dorn. Remember that. My decree still stands, and I have the support of Jagatai and Korax.
And what of Vulcan, Lehman, and Lionel Johnson?
Russ and the Lion have agreed to my posting, and the Codex, though not emphatically. As for Vulcan, well, he is in no position to strengthen either of our stances, now is he? Now, I emphatically suggest that you submit to my ruling. You will do so either willingly or by force. You have not been given leave.
You will have your answer soon enough, brother.
Dorn was confronted by sanctimoniousness and dry platitudes. In addition to stealing the Imperium from his brother who possessed the only legitimate claim, Guilliman also ordered him and all the rest of the Legionis Astartes to disband and reform into smaller fragmented chapters of 1,000 or less Space Marines. Dorn was strongly opposed to it, and tensions grew. The Imperial Fist Primarch took to meditation in his sorrow, using the Pain Glove to straighten out his mind. The Pain Glove was an artifact of the Imperial Fists, which is a gauntlet designed to stimulate immense pain in the wearer, to maintain said agony and never allow the wearer a moment's reprieve. One could be forgiven for seeing it as a torture device, yet for Rogel, it was a comfort to the pain in his mind and soul. It allowed him to review the circumstances less burdened by murky lament in his mind. This led Dorn to realize that there was only loss to be had in standing against Guilliman and his Ultramarines. The resulting conflict would truly undo what Sanguinius had sacrificed himself for, what the Emperor had been entombed and damned for. Dorn also realized that his own legion took after himself quite closely and would stalwartly not accept this decimation of their brotherhood, even if he himself demanded it. Thus, Dorn took his entire legion on a quest seemingly against the traitorous mongrels of the Iron Warriors, to Perturabo's eternal fortress, and a battle that would forever be known as the Iron Cage. There, Dorn unleashed his sons against the Iron Warriors and their battlements to devastating losses. Countless Imperial Fists died in the siege, and very well would have all died. This was no accident. Dorn was a seasoned master of defense. It would have only taken a single glance for him to realize the trap that had been laid. I believe Dorn intended to sacrifice his entire legion here, including himself. He would not have wanted to lose his sons to Guilliman's bloody Codex, for they were all he had left. The Iron Cage was a chance for them all to die together, as a unified force, as a brotherhood, as a father with his sons, performing their given purpose as warriors of the Imperium. Alas, this act of sacrifice was interrupted by Guilliman and his Ultramarines, who had only realized in time what Dorn was doing. Before any interpret this as a sign and showcase of Guilliman's care for his brothers, allow me to remove the hood from your eyes. This was not an act of love and respect on behalf of Guilliman, merely a political one. Had he allowed Dorn to die at the Iron Cage, sacrificing himself and his sons so soon after standing in opposition to Guilliman's Codex Astartes, it would have reflected poorly upon Guilliman. Seeds of dissent would have been sown by Dorn's apparent act of martyrdom, for many would have seen it as Dorn declaring he'd rather die, and he and his entire legion die, than bend the knee to reboot Guilliman. Potentially, even other Primarchs would be stirred by such actions, such as Russ, who possessed his own intense sense of principles and honor. With the aid of the Ultramarines, the Imperial Fists and Dorn were successful in the battle. though at the immense cost to the once mighty legion. Though nigh on 100,000 entered the siege, only a mere 3,000 or so survived. Amongst their number was the first captain of the Imperial Fist Legion and former right hand to Dorn himself, Sigismund. Sigismund was amongst the Imperium's mightiest warriors, one of unparalleled lethality and skill besides the Primarchs themselves, to the extent that during the Siege of Terra, the Emperor himself recognized Sigismund's skill and adorned him with the best weapons and armor available, entitling Sigismund his champion. Additionally, well before the heresy had begun, Sigismund had dueled the legendary warrior Khan of the World Eaters Legion, and in their fighting pits beat him on numerous occasions, forming a fierce rivalry both would never forget. Though they were still allies at the time, their duels could easily be mistaken for challenges to the death to any passerby. Even later, as enemies, Sigismund would yet again prove the superior warrior, and cast Khan down with deft skill. For this and many other reasons, Sigismund is easily my favorite character in the 40k mythos, and thus I wish to dedicate an entire video on him in the future. Therefore, I will only elaborate on the most necessary information here in relation to the Black Templars and the events that have unfolded. Dorn and Sigismund had once had a bond of trust and respect that potentially superseded that of Dorn and his brother Primarchs, with due exceptions such as Horus and Sanguinius, of course. Sigismund himself had great pride in this and always aimed to reinforce this trust with his actions. However, towards the very beginning of the heresy, Sigismund was approached by Euphrates Keeler. Euphrates had previously been a remembrancer, those chosen by the Emperor to archive and record the events of the Great Crusade. However, she witnessed a demon of the warp firsthand during her duties, which traumatized her, resulting in her shift in perspective from a regal remembrancer to a zealotous follower of the Lectitio Divinitatis, one of the precursors to what would be recognized as the imperial cult, and in turn, the ecclesiarchy. Euphrates, being amongst those who had escaped Horus's retinue, had first reported the Primarch's betrayal to the Imperial Fist Legion of Astartes and Dorn himself. Sigismund had been taken aside by Euphrates, and she impressed upon him tidings of the future, impressing upon the honorable warrior not to leave his father's side, and entreating a vision onto Sigismund. This vision was a potent and palpable window into the future of the Imperium, and even Sigismund's own death. Sigismund had, even before this, suspected a dour future for the Imperium. He had once spoken to Gavia Loken about how the legions would never know peace, even if they succeeded in reconquering the galaxy, as they would always be forced to safeguard it. Even saying the tagline that would reverberate across eternity. In the far future, there will be only war. Despite that, however, what Euphrates had shown him had been so severe that it shook even the stalwart Sigismund. As with the vast majority of Astartes and their Primarchs, Sigismund believed in no gods, no mystical lunacies, only the hard, concrete sciences and philosophies of the Imperium. Yet that vision, the words and demeanor of Euphrates, and the fall of Horus, it all fundamentally changed Sigismund. In a single moment, he had experienced several lifetimes worth of change. Thus, when Dorn ordered his trusted right hand to travel to the Isfahan system to ascertain the situation and take action if possible, Sigismund firmly refused his liege lord, something Dorn had never witnessed nor experienced at Sigismund's hands before. But his trust in Sigismund wavered above all, and he assumed the first captain had his reasons, thus allowed for others to go in his place. Sigismund kept the true reasons from Dorn, as he feared his father would not understand. This unfortunately was all too accurate of an assessment of Dorn's willingness to listen to such reasoning. In fact, Sigismund could never have been prepared for the true extent of the Primarch's aversion to it. After the drop site massacre, and the revelation that not only the Lunar Wolves, Death Guard, World Eaters, and Emperor's children had turned traitor, but also the Alpha Legion, Iron Warriors, Word Bearers, and Night Lords. 8 entire legions, 8 Primarchs. Half of the Legiones Astartes in their entirety were attempting to destroy all they had built together. Dorn quickly reorganized his forces to establish defenses and reinforce key strategic positions across the Imperium. Sigismund, however, was best suited for offensive use, and Dorn knew that well. Thus he ordered his favored son to take whatever and whomever he needed, and root out the traitors within the sol system around Terra, and slaughter them. Sigismund agreed, but felt he could no longer withhold his reasons for having not gone to the Isfan system, as Dorn had previously ordered. Therefore he revealed all to his gene-sire. Euphrates' warnings, the visions, all of it. Dorn was incensed by these explanations and rebuked his first captain viciously. Dorn spat venom as he dressed down Sigismund and explained that these visions were delusional fancies, and even if there was truth to them, that Astartes and Primarch both were tools and servants to the Emperor. Their fate never was and never would be their own. In Dorn's eyes, Sigismund had trampled on all the trust between them, and in doing so squandered the Emperor's trust in Dorn. Seeing his Primarch's burning resentment and hatred, Sigismund unsheathed his blade and offered it to Dorn in penance, encouraging Rogel to execute him as a way to atone. 3 factors saved Sigismund's life in that moment. The first was the situation they were all in, as Dorn could not afford to upheave his chain of command in such dire circumstances. The second was the morale of the Legion. If Dorn executed Sigismund, then the whole Legion would come to know why, and they would falter knowing the once great first captain had fallen to superstition and dogma, as the enemy Astartes had. Then finally, the third reason, the one most important in my eyes, personally. Dorn's love for his son. As with the Emperor with Horus on the bridge of the vengeful spirit, Dorn found he shared his own father's weakness for his own favored son. Thus, Dorn deigned Sigismund to live with his shame, but perform his duties. However, Dorn issued a punishment to Sigismund all the same. One so great and so terrible that death would have been a reward by comparison. Rogel Dorn stripped Sigismund of the title he was most proud. More so than Astartes, more so than First Captain, and more so than he would ever have been for Emperor's Champion. Dorn stripped Sigismund of the title of son. Dorn disowned a man who loved him more than anything in existence, and I would wager that Sigismund's own heart shattered with that last gleam of care in Dorn's eyes. After the iron cage and crippling of the Imperial fists at Dorn's command, the once mighty Legion was dissolved as bid by the Codex Astartes, and reformed into chapters of 1,000 or less Astartes. Dorn was given charge to place those he wished in whichever groupings he saw fit. For his own chapter, readopting the former Legion's title of Imperial Fists, he chose those he deemed most faithful and loyal to himself and the Imperium. For the Crimson Fists, he chose the most young and green of his Legion, with the exception of its leadership, which were made up of its eldest numbers. And for the Black Templars, their third and final deviation from the former Legion, Dorn chose those he deemed to be the least faithful and most extreme of his former Legion, the outcasts and disgraces to his name. Of course, Dorn named his greatest disgrace as their chapter master, Sigismund.
It is the duty of the initiate to pass on what he has learned of the craft of death, and thus pave the way for the heroes of the future.
Sigismund, swallowing his pain and loss, immediately commanded his new chapter to embark on a crusade against the forces that would hound humanity. Whether that be Xenos, Psyker, or heretics of the Dark Powers, it mattered not. Whilst beginning their eternal crusade, Sigismund imparted upon his fellow dejected brothers his beliefs and his disdain for the Codex Astartes. He preached loudly and firmly how the Codex was an affront to all Rogel had taught them and how to conduct the ways of war. He stressed how it was the superior-minded Guilliman's delusional solution to ward off heresy from the Brotherhood of the Astartes, and that it only served to pointlessly weaken the Space Marines as a fighting force. With all that being preached stoutly and confidently, the Black Templars took no stock of the Codex, and in fact, came to abhor it, as the insult it was to the Astartes and their loyalties. Centuries would pass under Sigismund's leadership, and the Black Templars made true to his vision. They reached the outer reaches of Imperial space and hammered hard against all in their path that would deign to impede humanity. With every battle, the Templars would thank the Emperor for aiding them in victory. With every death of a brother Templar, they would pray to the Emperor he find rest. And with every new initiate and neophyte added to their ranks, thanks would be offered in the mighty Emperor's name. The chapter lived and breathed faith in the God Emperor, and with the Elder Templar, who had formerly been Imperial Fists, dying off with every campaign, so too did the once-held truth that the God Emperor was a mere man. It is not known to what extent Sigismund himself believed in the Emperor's divinity, but he certainly laid the groundwork and took no effort to stamp on the most extreme voices, declaring so amongst his retinue. The chapter proudly removed the Imperial Aquila from their armor and adopted the belief that they were not to wear the Emperor's symbol, for they were the true symbol of his will. In addition to wholly and truly subvert Guilliman's Codex Astartes, Sigismund reformatted the assigned internal structure of the chapter. The Black Templars would possess no scout company for their recruits, but instead assign initiates, what were ordained neophytes, to mentor and train amongst the aspirants. With neophytes being the lowest amongst the chapter, they each essentially squire initiates in everyday life and in battle. Over time, the initiate mentor will individually determine the aptitude of their pupil, and should they be deemed worthy, they are sent to the chaplains to undergo trials to be purified, for their final step to becoming full-fledged battle brothers and initiates themselves. This unique restructuring of the chapter paradigm is what allows the Black Templars to bolster their numbers well, and beyond that of 1,000 Space Marines, without technically being in breach of the Codex they so abhor, as this would have them deemed as traitors by the greater Imperium at hand. Now a question for the uninitiated to the Templars will likely ask, why do the Templar bear a cross as their symbol, like the Christ Church Templars in ancient history? Well, the exact origins and process in which each chapter came to identify is not known beat for beat. However, it is easily surmised that Sigismund himself suggested the iconography and namesake. After all, Sigismund himself was a Terran born. Thus, he no doubt grew up hearing myths and legends of ancient Terra's history, which likely included stories of the dogmatic crusades and the warriors of faith who had conducted it. Having freshly gained spirituality himself, no doubt Sigismund saw it as only too appropriate for his own chapter. For 500 years, Sigismund crusaded with his chapter, expanding his ranks well beyond that of the Codex Astartes, and hunting the Imperium's enemies with extreme prejudice. In that time, the High Marshal, as was the title of the Black Templars chapter master, grew older. Sigismund was still a powerful and lethal combatant of the fields of war throughout, but even a Space Marine begins to falter with time. And after 1,000 years of endless service, countless battles and injuries that would make even the strongest men recoil, Sigismund was not a warrior in his prime any longer, even for an Astartes. What we next unravel is not an easy thing to recount, yet I will for the sake of understanding you all are owed. Sigismund and his chapter's flagship fleet traveled out at the very edge of known space. Then, the Black Templars' Vox channels would receive word of a substantial nature. For you see, they were traveling near the Eye of Terror at this time, and took in a terrible sight. From the Eye of the Warp emerged countless ancient Imperial ships of the Great Crusade era. Though they were twisted and befouled versions of what they had once been, it took mere seconds for Sigismund to realize what was crawling from those horrid depths, and without hesitation, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Sigismund ordered his own paltry fleet to engage the traitor Astartes without hesitation. The fleets engaged one another, and Sigismund plunged his flagship to the enemy fleet's heart, directly at Abaddon the Despoiler, former right hand to Horus and now leader of the traitor's hordes, in his place. Once in range for communication, Abaddon called to Sigismund and said,
"Only you, Sigismund, would pursue a grudge to the very borders of hell. That's a hatred too pure. I can't help but admire it."
And Sigismund replied simply and bluntly,
"I suffer not the unclean to live."
This seemed to bring back treasured memories for Abaddon as he responded,
"Blood of the gods, it is good to see you again, Sigismund."
Abaddon then shortly thereafter boarded Sigismund's ship to do battle. It was there the two mighty warriors faced one another, Sigismund aged but hearty, and Abaddon empowered by the foul powers of the warp, and untouched by the passage of time. One would think such a matchup would be horrendously one-sided, yet alas, Sigismund never knew how to be weak. He faced the malignant traitor before him stalwartly, eyes glaring with intense and righteous fury. Abaddon motioned his yipping sycophants to stay out of what was to come and to engage the rest of the ship. The two both respected this fight in their own right, and would have no others interrupt. Sigismund would hand his black sword to his second-in-command and order him to retreat. The chapter's relic from the Emperor would not be taken by such unworthy foes. Sigismund would instead hold aloft his old blade, a two-handed power sword he'd used for a millennia. The two traded one last set of glances, meeting eye to eye. Sigismund's eyes were old and wrinkled, yet piercing and burning alight with determination. Abaddon's were intense and fiery, slowly dipping into madness. The gaze lasted a mere moment, but for the two enemies it lasted an eternity. Then, Abaddon blinked, and Sigismund lunged forward at blinding speeds. Sigismund slashed hard and brutally at Abaddon, but the degenerate was able to parry the strike, his reflexes empowered by the torrents of the warp. The two exchanged many savage strikes, though Abaddon seemingly held the advantage. It seemed Sigismund was faltering completely, and Abaddon, thinking he was taking advantage of a weakened opponent, aimed to cut Sigismund down. This was a foolish decision, for Sigismund had faltered intentionally, feigning frailty just long enough to take advantage of his overzealous opponent. Deftly avoiding the initial death blow by Abaddon, Sigismund plunged his sword straight through Abaddon's Terminator armor, chest, and out his back, all the way to the blade's hilt. For the briefest of moments, both had thought the Night King had won. Abaddon, however, quickly struck back outward at Sigismund and successfully disemboweled the Night King, flaying his innards across the floors of the bridge. Both warriors faltered, both gravely injured, but only one fatally. Sigismund fell upon the deck floor, his blood raining and sputtering about. Any other being would have faded near instantly after such an attack, but none are like Sigismund. Weakly, the old warrior reached towards the hilt punctuating Abaddon's chest. His intent clear, push the blade even further through his chest. Abaddon was astonished by the old warrior before him. Despite such a wound as he'd sustained, his belly, lungs, and intestines strewn about like confetti, the old knight still had the sheer force of will to stay alive and further damage if not kill him. As Abaddon himself acknowledged, he could not breathe at all, and marveled at Sigismund's refusal to die. Abaddon entreated Sigismund, pleading with him to accept the failure he'd earned. Sigismund spat on such sentiments, and stared daggers at his former brother Astartes, turned foul and twisted monstrosity. With what breath was captured in his throat as his lungs, stomach, and entrails were minced gore, Sigismund let out his final words.
You will die, as your weakling father died. Soulless, honorless, weeping, ashamed.
It was then that Sigismund's soul left his body as he uttered the last word, ashamed. In that final moment, I believe Sigismund would have recollected Dorn's last true look upon him as he offered his life as penance. In the briefest of moments, Sigismund would have wished to see his father one last time before the end. Not to beg for forgiveness, nor to rebuke Dorn back, but just to see him one last time and say goodbye.
Let a wave of repugnance for the enemy watch over you. Let hatred fill you. Hate is good, for our goal is a human galaxy. We are called by the Emperor with a sacred duty to conquer it in his name.
The Black Templars survived this encounter, and rebuilt their numbers in full, and then some. Abaddon's first Black Crusade was successfully repelled and defeated, although he still remained, and would attempt his folly crusades over a dozen times over, with little success. All the while, the Black Templars would honor their fallen patriarch. Sigismund had shown them the way. He had established the path on which they were to follow, without hesitation or question. Sigismund had taught them faith in the Emperor, and its true and overwhelming strength. So, they have accrued many great tales, exploits, and heroes in their historical accounts, and with each year that passed they converted further into the teachings of the imperial cult, believing the Emperor to be a god. Each chapter of the Black Templars saga since their founding is worthy of its own dedicated log, so I shall mention only a few here to punctuate the legacy they have built. 219 years after Sigismund's death, and Dorn's own death, both of which happened the same year, 781 M31. The War of the Beast came for the Imperium. A galaxy-shattering wah of orcs came ravaging the galaxy. The Imperial Fist answered the call of duty and faced the Green Tide as it overwhelmed all in its path. As a result, the entirety of the Imperial Fist chapter, the remnants of Dorn's chosen few, were slaughtered in their entirety. The High Lords of Terror were in disarray as they argued and debated on how to handle this overwhelming threat they had severely underestimated. This is where the Black Templars, as often happens in the Imperium's history, took control of the situation. High Marshal Bohemond and the new leader of the Black Templars led his brothers against the Greenskins. They had received word only too late to interfere and to aid their former brothers in battle. But a burning hatred redoubled in them after hearing the Imperial Fist's fall. Thus, Bohemond vowed vengeance upon the foul Xenos and instigated the Last Wall Protocol. A failsafe Rogaldorn himself wrote into the teachings of his chapter, and its subsequent ones after Guilliman forced his compliance. The Last Wall Protocol stated that if the Imperium was ever in immense peril, likely due to the Space Marines being too divided to properly coordinate a defense as ordained by Guilliman, then the Imperial Fist Legion would be reformed. All Sons of Dorn would come together once more, and the reunified 7th Legion would strike against the enemy that dared threaten the Imperium of Man. After the very lengthy affair that was the War of the Beast, the Sons of Dorn would have to disband back into their chapters. High Marshal Bohemond ordered a large contingent of his own battle brothers to reform the then extinct Imperial Fist chapter alongside the other chapters who stemmed from them. Their fathers chosen, the namesake of their legion, would not be allowed to fall to the dark. Thus, for the Black Templars at least, the War of the Beast had ended. High Marshal Bohemond ordered his great fleet to re-embark on its eternal crusade, and the Imperial Fist stood freshly resolute, now manned with the truest faithful Sons of Dorn, who would maintain Dorn's as they had his most stout son, Sigismund. In the year 378 M36, the War of Apostasy raged within the Imperium. Goj Vandaya, who had seized control over the Imperium's government through its two predominant pillars, the Administratum and the Ecclesiarchy, occupying even the Imperial Palace upon Terra as his own, the Custodes and the God Emperor himself deep below his feet all the while. Vandaya committed numerous heresies of his own and engaged in intense degeneracy. This resulted in a civil war within the Imperium once more, though thankfully not between chapters of the Emperor's chosen Astartes, but between the followers of a madman and the entirety of the rest of the Imperium. Though Vandaya cleverly established an elite military force of his own, the brides of the Emperor, the precursors to the Sisters of Battle, Vandaya had tricked them into believing him the prophet of the Emperor, and he took full advantage of these faithful women, both as zealotous militants and as concubines to unleash his demented carnal pleasures upon. Initially, the Astartes took little note of Vandaya, being too preoccupied with other campaigns and charges across the Imperium. However, in the depths of his increasing power-drunk madness, Vandaya ordered his forces to attack the Adeptus Astartes, due to their refusal to conform to his rule and their public support of his newly formed rival Sebastian Thor and his Confederation of Light. The Black Templars were amongst those attacked. In their case, as the Black Templars are primarily fleet-based, the majority of their forces are constantly moving, engaging in campaign after campaign. However, the chapters still formed chapter keeps on worlds they had liberated from either Xenos or heretical influence. The Black Templars' primary fleet was returning to such chapter keeps in the Segmentum Solar, and arrived to find them destroyed utterly from orbital bombardments. Their token few brothers who had stayed behind to maintain said keeps dead in the rubble, or incinerated from the blasts. Normal Astartes, as well as honored brothers entombed in dreadnoughts, wiped out by some madman on Terra. The Templars were incensed, with boundless rage at this treachery, and they called forth the full might of their number available to besiege Terra. They would bring this wretched heretic in holy garb to heal, and would rip out his spine if they were feeling kind. Thus, the Black Templars conjoined their fleet with that of Sebastian Thor's, along with several other chapters who had been attacked, including the Templars' progenitor chapter, the Imperial Fists. Yet again, the Sons of Dorn joined together to destroy the Imperium's enemies and safeguard its future. The Confederation of Light, now aided by 4 full chapters of Astartes, several Imperial Guard regiments, and Tech Guard of the Mechanicum. This Confederation of Light descended upon Holy Terror and besieged the Imperial Palace to devastating effect. However, the siege lasted for an extended period of time. Even with no Astartes aiding Vandia, the palace's defenses were no laughing matter, and had been maintained extensively over the millennia. Even a token force like Vandia's could potentially withstand the assault of a legion of Astartes for a good long while. However, it would not be at the hands of the Templars nor Astartes that Vandia would meet his end, and the Emperor's justice. Instead, it would be at the very hands of the bodyguards he had violated, spiritually and physically. The brides of the Emperor, and more specifically their leader, Alicia Dominica, who would go on to officially found the Sisters of Battle and become their patron saint. During the closing moments upon Terra, I believe the Black Templars would have committed their prayer hymns after battle, and the brides of the Emperor would have joined them in this. I also believe the Templars to have acknowledged them and their faith with fondness and respect, although this interaction is safe supposition on my part and not detailed specifically in canon. The last campaign I shall detail for the Templars is also the one for which they are most known, the Third War for Armageddon, though specifically Helbrick's assault upon the Orcs' space hulk above it. Now, a full video will be dedicated to the events of this story in the future, but I shall summarize it here to further paint the portrait that is the Black Templars chapter of Adeptus Astartes. In the year 998 M41, the Imperium was besieged by the biggest Orc war since the War of the Beast many millennia prior. As before, the Templars answered the call for the Imperium, and with untold ferocity, slammed against the green tide. High Marshal Helbricht, the inheritor of Sigismund's will, was a natural-born leader and a brilliant commander even amongst the Astartes. The crusading fleets of the Templars, under his command, whittled away at the Orc space hulks. Constant boarding actions, demolition, and direct fire from the fleet's craft made the Greenskins pay dearly for every inkling of space they dared to tread through. On the surface of Armageddon, Marshals Rickard and Almeric led their own contingents against the Orcs upon the volcanic hellish surface. Battle after battle they fought, the dead on both sides piling high. But endure the Templars did, the very spirit of Sigismund driving them forth, and the very thought of the Emperor holding them up high. During the Void battles, Helbricht led a boarding assault upon the Orc space hulk dubbed the Malevolent Dread. Upon this monstrosity of a craft, he and the Emperor's champion Vosper and a contingent of Terminators plunged themselves into the ship determined to set demolition charges to destroy the hulk from within. During the assault, the Templars pushed into the gap between the two massive hunks of ships that made up the space hulk. Here the Templars made a stand, forcing the Greenskins through a choke point and gunning them down in swarms. The Greenskins, however, threw themselves at the firing line with reckless abandon. Despite this overwhelming tide, the Templars held firm, powered well by their faith and sheer force of will. Helbricht and Vosper led a counterattack against the coming tide, and out of the massive Greenskins emerged a massive Orc, the Space Hulk's war boss, and one of Gazkul's lieutenants in the war. As is tradition for the Emperor's champion, Vosper challenged the war boss for his head, and struck forth to duel the monster. With Sigismund's black sword in hand, Vosper clashed brutally with the beast, and though he met the warboss blow for blow, he had not been prepared for the beast to bull his full body mass into the Templar. Knocked off balance briefly, the beast took his advantage and split Vosper's skull in two, killing the valiant warrior brutally. This turned the tide, and the Orcs successfully ripped the Templars apart steadily, and Helbricht himself was brought low, an Orc chopper buried through his armor and into his chest. The remaining Templar quickly scrabbled to collect the Black Sword and their High Marshal, then made their escape, though not without severe losses. The outcome was terrible. Several other boarding parties were too deep to be retrieved from the hulk, and though Helbricht and his retinue were recovered, the rest could not be. The fleet was forced to leave them behind, to die. Now many would assume these battle brothers to have lost all hope due to this, that they would fall to despair and die lamenting their abandonment. This is not the way for the Templar, for death is not a source of fear, but of release. As long as they died fighting in the Emperor's name, as long as they died fighting for his Imperium and the fate of humanity, they would know peace beyond the mortal coil. They would be rewarded for all they had given and more. With such prospects, I ask you, adjutants, would you go quietly? Would you lie down and die knowing it to be inevitable? No. You would make the enemy pay the heftiest toll the galaxy had ever seen for your life. You would show them every ounce of value and valor you possess with every dozen of them you cut down. All the while letting out a battle cry the Emperor himself would recognize and hear in the heavens. And he would set a seat for you at his table, patiently ready for your final dance of glory to conclude, smiling at you all the while. These events, these chapters amongst a legacy of untold valor and honor, perfectly encapsulate just who and what makes up the Black Templars. Their deeds and sacrifices built and maintained the Imperium, as well as humanity in its entirety. Since their inception under Sigismund so soon after nearly being sacrificed at the heels of Guilliman's oppressive codex, the Templar have kept the Imperium intact. Not because of it, but in spite of it. If not for the Templar and their sheer tenacity against the Codex and its restrictions, the Imperium would have fallen time and time again, without question. For the valor and heroism needed to push back the darkness of the Imperium cannot be outlined in a tome, no matter how cleverly or stringently written. For valor is found in the hearts of the faithful and the gallant. It is found in the whole sum of a Black Templar. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this second long-form entry into the 40k universe, and are looking forward to more in the future. Make sure to subscribe so you can stay apprised of the latest uploads, and leave a like to let me know you enjoyed it. I also always love to hear from you amazing people, so feel free to drop a comment below letting me know what you thought. Anyway, that's it from me, guys, and remember, the Emperor protects.